Well, so many questions, so little time. Tom Verducci, senior baseball writer at Sports Illustrated. I've been talking about Sandy Koufax 50 years ago on Yom Kippur. He decides that he is, and I don't think he was deeply religious, but he knew what was better for his overall religion, that he decided not to pitch on Yom Kippur, the holiest of days. How would that play out now, Tom, if a pitcher decided that they weren't going to pitch Game 1 of the World Series due to religious beliefs?
Well, think about it. It's 50 years ago. We're still talking about it. I'm sure another 50 years, they'll still be talking about that decision. So I think it would be just as big, if not bigger, in today's world. I mean, listen, Matt Harvey has become a cause célèbre in New York just based on innings count. Imagine if he decided he wasn't pitching Game 1 of the World Series because of religious beliefs. Yeah, it'd be huge.
But the negative side of it now, as opposed to 50 years ago, that would we be more cynical, negative, if we were looking at somebody who decided not to do that?
In a world with social media? Are you kidding?
I know.
I think that's the thing. It gives an outlet to all these people who do have negative thoughts. And back 50 years ago, you kind of kept it to yourself. So, yeah, it would be much more public. Although I think in a lot of ways we're also much more understanding and forgiving, too. I think about all the guys now who take paternity leave when the children are born. That never happened 50 years ago. And it is socially acceptable in the sports world now. So I think it would be more accepted, but there also the backlash at least would have amplification and be more public.
Have you talked to Koufax about this?
I have not talked to him specifically about that. You're right that, he was not a deeply, deeply religious man, but he's been on record as saying it really just wasn't a tough decision for him. It was just a matter of principle. And let's not forget that Walter Alston gave the ball in Game 1. It wasn't a bad option to fall back on. Don Drysdale, another Hall of Famer. And Drysdale didn't pitch that well, and when Alston came out to get the ball to get him out of the game, he said to Drysdale, I bet right now you wish you were Jewish too, don't you?
I know. one of the great lines. So they lose the first two games of the World Series, and then Koufax and Drysdale don't know who's pitching Game 7 against the Twins. They decide to go with Koufax, and he shuts him down to win the World Series.
Yeah, on 2 days of rest,
unbelievable.
Too, huh? And I mean, incredible too with that arthritic elbow, and 300 innings over the course of the season to get to that point. We'll never see it. I mean, as great as Bumgarner was, and contextually with nobody throwing the amount of innings they do, what he did last year in Game 7 was amazing. But to think what Sandy Koufax did, I mean, we literally will never see that kind of workload at that level of pitching perfection again.
And then you look at Matt Harvey with this whole innings count. We saw this with Steven Strasburg. What happened with yesterday's pitcher and today's? When did the disconnect start between the pitchers now and the pitchers of yesterday?
Well, you got to go back, first of all, I'm going back a ways here to 1980 when Billy Martin had that Oakland A's staff, and those young pitchers were completing virtually every game, and they all broke down very quickly after that season. And no manager wanted that over their head, that you were pitching them too deep into games. So people started cutting back on innings. And then fast forward to 2003 and that Cubs team with Pryor, Wood, and Zambrano, and you go back and look at their pitch counts in September of that year. They were all young, under 25, throwing 130, 140 pitches a game. And then they broke down, and that really had more to do with mechanics, I believe, than the way that they pitched in September. But the fact is that's when pitch counts became popularized, and people started paying attention to that, and they draw the line cause and effect, number of pitches, not just number of innings. So then everybody started cutting back on pitch counts. And now we're at this first generation of guys who've had Tommy John surgery at a young age. And quite honestly, Dan, nobody has the answer. This is all educated guesswork. And now we're just trying to learn as we go along what is the right way to bring a guy back from Tommy John surgery.
But I remember when Strasburg happened and we looked at Scott Boris's role, and it felt like he was saying, look, I'm protecting my client big picture here. And so he can get that $100 million contract or $200 million contract. And here we are with Scott Boras with Matt Harvey again. I understand trying to protect him, but as we saw with Strasburg, you may not get that chance again to pitch. And if you knew that you were going to have an innings count, why can't your innings count be at the end of the year, not at the beginning of the year or the middle of the year?
Well, that's a great point, and I think that's where the Nationals messed up with Strasburg. You know, he was actually back on the competitive mound in the minor leagues only 11 months after his surgery. With Harvey, the Mets, I think, were smart to give him a normal offseason and make sure he actually didn't throw a competitive pitch for 17 months after surgery. So to me, it's not analogous to Strasburg. And, you know, as much as they did baby Strasburg, you know, I'm not sure he still conquered his mechanical problems. I mean, the two biggest causes of pitching injuries are poor mechanics and fatigue. Well, almost nobody in the major leagues these days, as conservative as teams are, pitches fatigued. I mean, really fatigued to the point of possibly hurting themselves. It's mechanics that's the biggest problem of all. And that's the root cause to me. And I understand what Scott is doing. He should be looking after his clients. That's his job. But at the same time, when Strasburg is free agent after next season, when Harvey's a free agent in 3 years, is he going to bring up the fact that this first generation of pitchers who did have the surgery, and a lot of people think that holds up for only about 7 or 8 years, is he going to send out a warning that, hey, be careful with these guys and how much money you spend because they could be a breakdown waiting to happen a second time? I don't think we'll hear that.
He's Tom Verducci heading to D.C. to cover the Nationals, covered the Cardinals and Royals recently, and covering Rangers, Astros later this week. What's left? What's at stake here in the final week?
You know, jockeying for position in the National League. You know, you do want to stay out of that wild card game, and I think the Cubs are trying to force their hand. I don't care where that game is played, by the way. If it's Pittsburgh and Chicago, I don't think the Pirates are getting past Jake Arrieta, which is kind of a shame because I think the Pirates are a team that could win the World Series if they somehow beat Arrieta in one game. I think the Cardinals will hold on for the division. Of course, the American League, you know, the question is Houston. I think you know, once they got home, my man, that's chicken soup for them. As bad as they've played on the road, they get home, they're a completely different team. I'm not sure they're going to catch the first wild card spot with New York, but I think they're a solid second wild card right now.
We got Rob Manfred, the commissioner, on Thursday, and you know, one of the topics is this one-game playoff. I mean, I like it, you know, with the March Madness feel, but I just don't think it's fair to, you know, to play 6 months and have your season come down to the roll of the dice of, you know, your rotation and who's health, you know, all those things. I think a best of 3 is fair to both sides. What's the likelihood of a best of 3 wild card instead of the one and done?
0. And I know Theo Epstein brought this up, but I know managers hate the one and done game because, as you said, you do put an entire season on the line of one game. You know, you're subject to anything happening, like that old outfield fly rule, so to speak, in the Braves-Cardinals game a few years ago. But my answer to that is you just had 162 games, the biggest sample of all, to stay out of that game, and you didn't do it. Now you got to take your chances in that game. And the reason it's not going to change, Dan, is because the fans like it.
Yeah.
Anything that makes the manager uncomfortable, that's cool with me. I mean, the last thing we need is more postseason games that are non-decisive. You know, you see it in the ratings. People want to see games when it's win or go home, and you just can't add a couple more games that are non-decisive.
Who's your Cy Young? Both leagues.
I've got to go with Greinke. As great as Arrieta has been the second half, to me, I can't recall a pitcher who's been point on every single time he took the ball this year, and that for me is Greinke. And the AL, David Price has certainly closed the gap. I still think it's Dallas Keuchel. He has one more home start to go to finish 15-0 at home, which is ridiculous.
Wow.
But that's razor close, though. Price could still get it from Keuchel, but I've got Dallas Keuchel right now.
Now, Greinke can opt out after
he
this?
Can, and I'm 100. Well, I shouldn't say 100, but I'm 99% sure that he will. Yeah.
And what's he going to be worth on the open market?
You know, he's a little bit older than some of these guys, like the Scherzers who got there at 29, 30. But you know, he's such an athletic guy. He's already pitching. He can prove with decreased velocity. You know, his fastball's down a tick or two, but he's got one of the best changeups in all of baseball. He's never had any arm injuries. So, yeah, he's a $30 million pitcher. I think the question is, how many years are you talking about with him? Is it 5, 6, or 7?
MVPs?
Bryce Harper, I don't care if the Nationals don't get in. You're talking about a historically great season that you cannot ignore. I think he'll win and win fairly easily. And the American League, if you had asked me a couple of weeks ago, Dan, I would have said Donaldson overtook Trout I don't think that's the case right now.
Wow.
I've got Mike Trout now slightly ahead of Donaldson. And again, it's not so much the Blue Jays get in and the Angels don't. I mean, the Angels are still playing meaningful games with a week and a half left in the season. So that team would be a third, fourth place team without Mike doing what he did for them.
But when's the last time we had both MVPs not in the postseason?
Well, especially you think about it, it's never happened in the short time we've had these two wild cards. I mean, you have one out of every 5 or 3 teams in the league going into the postseason.
Yeah.
So that would be unusual, but just check out their numbers, man. Those numbers are freaky.
Has Harper caught Trout?
In some ways, yeah, I think so. I think one difference is still that Mike plays in the center of the diamond, plays center field. It's a little more, it's more of a premium on the defensive spectrum, but I mean, this is now what we thought Bryce would be, just a tremendous power hitter. It looks like he's a 500 career home run guy waiting to happen. But maybe the batting average, the ability to get on base is what has closed the gap. I'll go back to spring training when Bryce told me, listen, I know I can hit that nasty slider down and away, but I have to learn that I can't hit it all the time. And if I can just get better pitches, I'll put up big numbers. It's exactly what he's done. He has been much more selective at the plate. When they do challenge him, he just doesn't miss.
Thank you, Tom. Safe travels.
You got it, Dan. Thank you.
Tom Verducci, senior baseball writer, Sports Illustrated.